shots ring out in the barroom night. Enter Patty Valentine from the floor above. She sees a bartender in a pool of blood. Cries out, they kill my love. Here comes the story of the hurricane. The man the authorities came to blame for something that he never done. Put in a prison cell, but one time he could be the champion of the world.
So now we've got John in jail, awaiting his PFA hearing, approximately 3 weeks before he goes in front of a jury for a trial to decide his fate. And he can't even get a bed inside of a cell to sleep on. The Clearfield County Jail is overcrowded, something I'll touch on in a later episode because it is extremely relevant. So he's forced to sleep on a cot in the hallway, which I'm not sure if any of you have ever had to prepare any sort of legal defense for yourself, but it's tough enough as is. Try having a PFA violation hearing and a jury trial back-to-back with no lawyer, being denied a public defender, and being forced to provide and craft your defense from inside of a jail cell, and actually not even inside of a cell, from the hallway on a cot. He's also withheld from receiving his life-sustaining heart medication for the first few days that he is in jail. They claim that he has no right to them, and he has to wait until the weekend is over before they can determine whether or not he actually needs them and what the proper dosage. So sleeping on a cot without his medication that actually keeps him alive and facing down 2 trials with which he has to prepare his own defense from behind bars, we arrive at the second PFA violation hearing. Now, this one is a little bit of a doozy, so this whole episode is pretty much going to be me reading and commentating on this transcript, and I just want to give you folks right now the permission to laugh, because frankly, if you don't laugh, you're going to become enraged beyond the point of reason. I know that that's what happened when I first read this. It's more than comical, and from last episode, I'm sure you can imagine exactly what types of defense we're about to hear as to why John should be in jail for 6 months after receiving his second alleged PFA violation. Before we jump into this transcript, though, I do want to remind everyone that you can go to corruptclearfield.com and check out all the documents that we're reviewing via the Dropbox link. You can read this transcript along with me if you'd like. You can pause or pretty much just exit out the rest of this episode and read the transcript for yourself, although I am going to give some commentary, so if you'd like to hear that, you'll have to stick around. Whatever way you choose to read it, just make sure you do hear or read exactly what went down in the courtroom that day, because, well, as the title of this episode suggests, it is an absolute kangaroo court. Go to page 1 here and begin. Attorney Baker, that's Assistant District Attorney Baker, says the Commonwealth would call Tara Gill, Your Honor, and before we begin, I would just stipulate that our witness would be sequestered. Deputy Winters is our only other witness, and she's the affiant. We just ask if the defendant has any witnesses that they be sequestered as well. The court says, Mr. Gill, if you have any witnesses, they need to have a seat out in the hallway. Do you have any witnesses you're planning on calling today? Boy, that's so strange that they wouldn't want anyone in the actual courtroom to hear what's about to happen. John says, no, sir. The court says, all right. Who's first? Who's your first witness? Attorney Baker says, Tara Gill, Your Honor. Thereupon, Tara Ann Gill, the witness herein, having first been duly sworn, was examined and testified as follows. This is the direct examination by Attorney Baker. Could you state your name for the record, please, ma'am? Yes, Tara Ann Gill. Okay, and where do you live, Miss Gill? I live at 1316 Daisy Street. And how old are you today? How old am I? Yes, 49. I don't want to be rude, but I'm just asking. Miss Gill, do you have a PFA entered on your behalf? Yes, I do. Your Honor, may I approach the witness? Says Attorney Baker. At this point, the parentheses indicate that Attorney Baker takes the final protection from abuse order, marked Commonwealth's Exhibit 1, and Attorney Baker says, I'm handing a copy to the defendant. I'm going to hand you what I'm going to mark as Commonwealth 1. Do you want a copy, Your Honor? Attorney Baker starts off by saying, and, Miss Gill, do you recognize that document? Yes, sir, I do. Okay, what is Commonwealth's 1? Excuse me? What is that document? Commonwealth's number 1. That is a protection from abuse order for myself. Okay, are you the plaintiff on that? Yes, I am. Who is the defendant? John Joseph Gill Sr. Do you recognize Mr. Gill in the courtroom today? Yes, I do. Could you point him out, please? Sitting right there, and in parentheses it says pointing. Attorney Baker then says, we'd ask the record to reflect identification of the defendant, Your Honor. The court. So noted. Attorney Baker, thank you. Back to questioning Tara. And Miss Gill, when did this PFA become effective? September 29th, 2015. And when does it expire? September 29th, 2018. Do you know when it was filed? It would be on the bottom right corner of the front. September 30th, 2015. Now, ma'am, I want to skip. I don't want to go through the whole PFA, but could you just state paragraph 7 of that PFA for the record? Yes. Paragraph 7 reads as follows. The following additional relief is granted as authorized by Section 6108 of the Act. Defendant is prohibited from having any contact with plaintiff or any person protected under this order, either directly or indirectly through third parties, by email, cell phones, text, IM, blogs, through special networking sites, including but not limited to Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, or by any or other electronic means, including no postings of any kind about the victim. So direct or indirect contact on Facebook. The defendant is not allowed to have that with you? Pardon? The defendant is not allowed to have direct or indirect contact with you on Facebook, correct? That is correct. Okay. Is that a true and accurate copy of the final protection from abuse order entered on your behalf against the defendant? Yes, it is. Attorney Baker then asks, or rather says, we'd offer Commonwealth's number 1 into evidence, Your Honor. The court says, any objection? It is admitted. Attorney Baker goes back to questioning. Now, ma'am, I want to take your attention forward a little bit, back to May 25th of this year. Do you recall that date? Yes, I do. Did you see any Facebook postings about you on that date? Yes, I did. From the defendant? Attorney Baker then says, Your Honor, may I approach the witness? The court says, you may. Thank you. In parentheses, it says a Facebook posting marked Commonwealth Exhibits 2, 3, and 4. Attorney Baker says, ma'am, I'm going to show you what I've marked as Commonwealth's Exhibit number 2, Commonwealth's Exhibit number 3, and Commonwealth's Exhibit number 4. Are you familiar with these exhibits, ma'am? Yes, I am. Okay, what are those exhibits? These are exhibits of 3 Facebook pages that Mr. Gill manages and posts on each of the 3 pages dated May 25th. And what are the contents of those posts? The post reads as follows. The need for prayers concerning the David and Goliath trial. It is a very fierce, white-hot, 3-part war. At this time, please pray with me for Thursday, May 26th, that God will prevail and reveal his perfect will to everyone. Everyone, please continue to pray for June 16th and July 8th to end Goliath's reign. Thank you so much. It goes on to say, I'm also asking all Facebook friends that are used prophetically to seek the Lord on my behalf and share all that he reveals. Please send by email, and then it lists John's email address, or send by mail, and it lists his mailing address. Attorney Baker says, okay, and who posted? What's the account that posted those? Are those 3 separate accounts? They are 3 separate accounts, all managed by Mr. Gill. He posted on each of these 3 accounts, 3 separate times. Okay, let's start with the 2 that are, you said the 2 that are from the same name. What's that name? That's J. Gill. And do you know who operates that account? Yes, I do. Who? Mr. Gill. The defendant? Yes. How do you know that? Because his name is there and his picture is right beside his name. Are you aware of him using that account in the past? Yes. And let's talk about it. I believe it's Commonwealth's number 3. What's the username on that one? The username is the Bishop's Corner. Truth versus tradition. Okay. And do you know who operates that account? Yes, I do. Who operates that account? Mr. Gill. The defendant? Yes. Okay. And how do you know that, ma'am? Because the account was created when he and I were still living in the same marital residence several years ago for the purpose of supporting the church that Mr. Gill runs. The church is called the Apostolic Believers Tabernacle. Are you aware of anybody else ever using those accounts other than Mr. Gill, the defendant? Myself. However, that has not happened for at least 2 years. I removed my name as administrator in all posts approximately 2 years ago. By the way, massive little accidental perjury right there on Tara's part. I have proof, as I'll show later, that she in fact deleted the request that John made to remove her as administrator and had actually commented on these pages in order to defame John less than a year prior to this incident in court, where she's saying it's been approximately 2 years since she's had access to those accounts. But that'll be for another episode. Just figure I'd give you a little sneak preview there. So you obviously didn't post this, says Attorney Baker. No, I did not. Okay. And so you know of nobody else that could have, other than you, the ability to post on the Bishop's Tabernacle. Correct. Or Bishop's Corner. I apologize, says Attorney Baker. She says, I understand. A.D. Baker goes on to say, and can you just read the email address associated with these posts, please? She says, yes, it is jgill@atlanticbb.net. And do you know who operates that email account? Yes, the defendant, Mr. Gill. Have you known anybody else to operate that account? No. Did you see these posts, ma'am? Tara says, yes, I did. Attorney Baker at this point says, how did you interpret those posts as they relate to you? Tara says, I interpreted these posts as being distributed over multiple Facebook pages for the purposes of as many viewers to read them and gain knowledge as possible. I interpret them as being directly related to me, considering the 3 dates listed. These are the 3 court dates that directly relate to only Mr. Gill and myself. Never mind the fact that Tara actually posts the dates for their court dates herself on her pages, so it's not as though this is knowledge that wouldn't be common knowledge to anybody that wanted to check. But I digress. Attorney Baker says, I'll stop you there. Why would they only relate to Mr. Gill and yourself? Tara says, because these 3 court dates, are directly related to PFA matters that are ongoing. What about a criminal trial? Tara says yes. These dates are related to a criminal trial regarding multiple PFA violations. And who is the victim in that trial? I am, says Tara. You are. Okay. And how did you feel that you were being referred to in those posts? Tara says, absolutely, without question. I'm a witness in this trial. I fully believe this is an attempt to intimidate myself. Attorney Baker says, why would you say that? Intimidate. Tara says, because of this statement in the post that ends with, everyone please continue to pray for June 16th and July 8th, which is the date of the criminal trial, to end Goliath's reign. Mr. Gill is referring to me. As Goliath, Attorney Baker asks. Tara replies, yes, sir. How did you come to that conclusion? Tara says, I came to this conclusion because in this post, Mr. Gill is requesting prayer for Goliath's reign to end. Therefore, it is my belief that Mr. Gill is portraying himself as David. And spiritually, 1 Samuel chapter 17, the story of David and Goliath is told, and David slays Goliath, actually quite horrifically. Without going into that, nonetheless, David slays Goliath, and I fully believe that this is the intention of Mr. Gill, which makes a lot of sense since she just agreed his intention was asking for prayer, and the post itself is asking for prayer. But, prayer, slaying somebody with a sword just like Israelite would do to a Philistine 5,000 years ago, it's all the same thing, people. Nothing to see here. Attorney Baker says, to beat Goliath? Tara replies, to beat Goliath. Yes. How did these posts make you feel? Tara says, I feel that my life is in danger, as well as the life of my children, and my family, and everyone I'm associated with. Because in the story of David and Goliath, whoever wins the battle gains control over everyone else and everything they own. And because of ongoing abuses for years that are on the record, yes, the record you created falsely, and because of ongoing abuses for years that are on the record, Mr. Gill has attempted several times, and will not stop attempting, to cause harm to my person, as well as whomever I associate with. Never mind that there's actually not anything on the record where, he's been proven to have actually physically taken action against her. And at Kangaroo Court, everything goes. I want to specifically ask you, those 4 words towards the end there, to end Goliath's reign, says Attorney Baker. Yes, says Tara. How did that specifically make you feel? Tara said, it's like a death threat to me. He's tried before and he will not stop, even if he has to go through a third party. Remember, she had previously stated in her last episode, the statement she gave to Officer Tracy Winter said she thinks that John, with no substantiation whatsoever, thinks that John has taken out a contract on her life. Contracted killer. That's the kind of crowd a 78-year-old minister of over 50 years hangs around with. I'm sure all of you know someone like that. Need someone whack? Just go to the local parish. So Attorney Baker says, you felt threatened for your life by that. Tara says, absolutely, yes. Are those true and correct copies of the Facebook posts from May 25th? Yes, they are. The court says we offer Commonwealths 2, 3, and 4 into evidence, Your Honor. I guess that's a typo. It should be Attorney Baker. And the court says any objection to these documents being admitted into evidence. The defendant, that's John, notice, for the first time now he gets to speak. He says, yes, sir. The court, being Judge Cherry, says, what is your objection? John says, my objection is that the prayer request is because the David and Goliath trial was just overwhelming to me, and it was for attorneys for me for the 16th and 8th. The man was praying that he would somehow be able to afford or have an attorney gifted to him, because of that whole his attorney lied under oath and filed a motion to withdraw his counsel and left him high and dry, and then he got arrested, and he was denied for a public defender because he has enough income, $20 approximately or so, too much per month in order to get a public defender, but he was also denied spousal support, so he doesn't have actual access to that money. All those reasons, kind of reasons that a person would actually be praying for somebody to deliver some sort of miracle onto them, is exactly what he was asking for. So again, I reiterate, he says, my objection is that the prayer request is because the David and Goliath trial was just overwhelming to to me, and it was for attorneys for me for the 16th and the 8th. I didn't have attorneys, and you were aware of that. The second part is, and of course, this is where he's cut off. Not allowed to speak anymore. Judge Cherry says, well, that's not a proper objection. The documents are admitted. I haven't said it yet. Been actually waiting for this episode to say it. My only assumption is that Judge Cherry will probably listen to all these, and I would like to say unequivocally, for the record, you, Judge Paul Cherry, are a tremendous asshole who is deserving of losing your position as a judge solely based on this case alone, but most likely based on what you have done as an entire body of work, because if you've done it to one person, you have undoubtedly done it to more. But I'll end my personal feelings towards you there, and we'll continue forward with the record. The court then says, any other questions? John says I, literally one word, the I, the letter I, says I, and Judge Cherry cuts him off. Hold on, sir. You'll be able to testify when it's your case. I think this case actually is his, so either somebody mistyped that or Judge Cherry misspoke. John says, I'm sorry. Attorney Baker says, we offer Miss Gill for cross-examination, Your Honor. The court says, do you have any questions for this witness? John says, no, sir. Now, you might wonder why John didn't ask Tara any questions in cross-examination, but I think considering the emotions that he was likely feeling at this time, the fact that this is his ex-wife whom he loves, who is some reason, unbeknownst to him, stabbed him in the back and betrayed him beyond measure over the last year. I think we can all agree that would be a difficult situation for someone to be in. So having already been shut down once by Judge Cherry when he tried to speak and plead his case, John passes and declines to cross-examine Tara. Court says you may step down. John says, thank you, Your Honor. And Attorney Baker says the Commonwealth would like to call Deputy Tracy Winters, Your Honor. Tracy Winters is sworn in, and Attorney Baker starts his line of questioning. Can you state your name for the record? Deputy Tracy Winters. And where are you employed, Deputy Winters? The Clearfield County Sheriff's Office. I can't hear, sir, says John. The witness says louder, the Clearfield County Sheriff's Office. Attorney Baker says, and how long have you been, or what's your position with that office? Tracy replies, a deputy sheriff. How long have you been a deputy? I believe 5 years. Attorney Baker says, I want to take your attention back to June 14th of this year. Did you receive a report about a possible PFA violation? Deputy Winters says, yes. And did you speak, or what was the nature of that violation? It was in reference to Facebook posts that the defendant had made about the victim. Okay, I want to, Attorney Baker says, if I may approach the witness, Your Honor. You may. I'd like to show you what's been previously entered as Commonwealth's 1. Who contacted you about that PFA violation? It would be the plaintiff in the petition, Tara Gill. And who did she contact you in reference of violating the PFA? Mr. John Gill. Do you recognize Mr. Gill in the courtroom? Yes. Could you point him out? He's seated in the yellow CCJ, that's Clearfield County Jail, jumpsuit. Attorney Baker then asks, we'd ask the record to reflect identification of the defendant. The court says, so noted. Attorney Baker says, did you investigate that matter? Yes. And did you review the Facebook posts? Yes, says Officer Winters, Deputy Winters. My mistake. Attorney Baker then says, if I may approach again, were those the Facebook posts that we've entered as Commonwealths 2, 3, and 4? Yes. Okay, and after speaking with Miss Gill and investigating, did you file the charges that bring us here? Yes. Did you believe the PFA violation occurred? Yes. And that's why you filed the charges? Yes. Attorney Baker then says, I offer for cross-examination, Your Honor. The court says, Mr. Gill, do you have any questions for this witness? And once again, John, in an impossible situation, says, no, sir, and declines cross-examination. Before we go forward, I'd like to point out a few of the more particular absurdities with what has just taken place. Beyond the actual biblical scope that this is being placed in, which is something we will comment on a little bit later, this Facebook post was made back in May. Tara didn't actually report it until the 14th. And then Officer Winters didn't even come out to investigate it until the 17th. Now, I'm not sure if any of you have ever been scared before. That's sarcasm. We all have. But you generally don't wait 2 to 3 weeks before dealing with the object causing you fear, the situation causing you to be afraid. You seek out a remedy for that situation almost immediately, especially if you are someone who, as Tara claims, was afraid for her life now and on multiple occasions. Well, you cannot be that afraid if you've gone about your life for 3 weeks before even reporting something. And also, the question needs to be asked, why did she report it directly to Officer Winters? Why didn't she go through proper channels like contacting the dispatcher for the the Clearfield Borough Police and asking them to send someone out, let alone send someone out on the 14th. Why didn't she call the dispatch and ask someone on that day in late May when she first saw the Facebook post, as she has herself testified that's when she saw it in this very transcript? Why not call the Clearfield Police and have someone come out then? Obviously, I have some answers for all of you, but I'm saving those for next episode. Provide a little suspense, foreshadowing. There's enough heavy stuff here to carry us through until the end, so we're going to get back to the record. You may step down, says Judge Cherry. Any other witnesses? Attorney Baker says, the Commonwealth rests, Your Honor. The court says, Mr. Gill, do you wish to testify in this matter? John, of course, says yes. Come forward and be sworn in. John is sworn in, and Judge Cherry says, Mr. Baker, I'm going to permit Mr. Gill to testify in narrative fashion as he is unrepresented today. Attorney Baker says, okay, that's fine, Your Honor. I'd like to reserve the right to object to things I feel wouldn't be proper under the rules of evidence. Judge Cherry says, you object as you see fit. I'm just saying I'm going to permit him to speak narratively because he's not represented. No one can ask him questions. Attorney Baker, that's fine, Your Honor. The court says, all right, sir. State your name for the record, please. John Gill. All right, sir. What would you like to tell me this afternoon? John starts off, undoubtedly nervous as all get out, but he begins with something he believes is relevant. Remember, he's been in jail now with no lawyer, no access to documents, sleeping on a cot in the hallway with no heart medication after having his lawyer abandon him, knowing that he was unable to provide a public defender. So he says, well, sir, I had a massive heart attack. Immediately, Attorney Baker says, I would object to relevance of the heart attack. The court says it is noted. Now, wouldn't you think that you would at least let him explain the context of the situation if you had anything resembling a heart within your own chest? But clearly, when you don't have a heart of your own, you can't understand a heart attack, I suppose. So it makes perfect sense. Attorney Baker says the reason for what's going on, well, now this is actually incorrectly noted here on the transcript. It's actually John saying, the reason for what's going on is I had asked for prayer requests because of everything I was going through, and it was just overwhelming. That's the David and Goliath portion. It's overwhelming. There's no way I could get a lawyer. The 3-part war I mentioned was for attorneys for both May 26th and July 8th, so that I would have an attorney somehow, but it hasn't happened. I was turned down. The second part of it was to help in jury selection, which that seemed to work out well. And the third part was the court-ordered discovery that they wanted for the trial coming up, which I have 13 witnesses that say I was not there, talking about at the jury trial. John wanted to do an alibi defense. He had 13 witnesses, had it all properly filed, had given it to Attorney Stephanie Cooper, and she did not file it for him. And then that motion in limine that Attorney Baker filed struck down his ability to call any alibis to the stand. So that hadn't happened yet, of course. In fact, that hasn't happened at all because this hearing is actually before that motion went into place. Sort of sheds light on who exactly Attorney Baker is for him to wait until John is in jail after this hearing to file that motion in limine. But these are reasonable things for a person to request prayer for. When you have jury selection, you pray if you're a person of faith. When you have to submit discovery for a jury trial, you pray if you're a person of faith. When you have a trial or a hearing and need an attorney, you pray as a person of faith. I can't even believe I have to say these things. I'm sure it's insulting to all of your intelligence that I would even have to make these points. But just for those who may be on the fence, I'm not sure how you could be at this point, you pray. That's what you do. But somehow this is being twisted and convoluted and used against John as a weapon. So John continues on. And what this request was about was just strictly religious. It had nothing to do with anything civil. If I would have put anything in there about the court or anything, I thought it would be inappropriate. He was even mindful when he made these posts to not mention Tara, to not mention what any of the dates were referring to. He was just asking for prayer. And again, if you are a person of faith, you know that this is not only common, it is expected when you are in a close-knit group of believers. For whatever faith it is you might ascribe to, you share your burdens. You tell people when it is you're going to be having a difficult or a troublesome time, and they pray for you during that period. People believe that prayer at a specific time when someone is going through something is something that can help more than prayer at a different time. This is very common. This is extremely common in any church, any building of faith, any group of faith that you would go to. It's unbelievable that this is how it's being twisted. John continues, so I asked people that I have 1,000 friends on Facebook, pastors, teachers, evangelists, and so on, asking them for prayer, that if the Lord showed them anything, to return it to me either through email or mail. And I had no understanding that this would in any way touch my dear wife. I never even thought, because I never mentioned one word ever about her on Facebook, ever. And this is all overwhelming. I needed help. Every way I tried to get help, I couldn't get give help, but I've never bothered her. I've never followed her. As the Lord is my witness, not one time did I ever follow her or harass her. And I have witnesses to prove in the trial coming up that I was not there when she said I was there. I was told that it doesn't matter by both my lawyer and by the district attorney that I have those witnesses. Keep that in mind. This is before Attorney Baker filed the motion in limine to have John's alibi defense, his actual alibi, suppressed. Before that was filed, and John was not allowed to have his alibis for his jury trial coming up here in less than 3 weeks, he was on the record saying that his attorney and the district attorney both said it didn't matter that he had those witnesses. So this here is some pretty undeniable proof that Stephanie Cooper failed as an attorney to represent John to the best of her ability, did not even file his alibis properly so that he could cross-examine them when he was pro se and defending himself. Attorney Baker then says, I'm going to object to that relevance. And what he's mentioning is actually something I didn't read at the very end of John's statement. He said, I had to go to Strawberry Square to the Attorney General's office. John tried to go above the Clearfield courts to the Attorney General's office to see what they could do. And so Attorney Baker is attempting to cut him off and not allow him to actually speak on that. John continues, though, I had to go to Strawberry Square to the Attorney General's office, and I had a half-hour talk with Attorney Harris from the Attorney General's office. Attorney Baker says, I'm going to object. Hearsay. The witness says, concerning the last, that would be John, and the court stops everything at that moment. It says, your conversation with the Attorney General, does it have any relevance to today's proceeding? John says, yes, Your Honor. Judge Cherry says, what is the relevance? John says, the relevance is my lawyer tricked me into getting the last PFA. I was supposed to sign not guilty, and she said, sign this so you don't have to go to jail. The court says, Judge Cherry, you ass, you tremendous ass, says, your objection is sustained. Anything else you want to state today, sir? John says, no, sir, I'm innocent of this. Judge Cherry says, cross-examination. Attorney Baker then says, Mr. Gill, are you familiar with the story of David and Goliath? Now, I'm not sure exactly what the rules are, and I'm not a legal mind, so perhaps somebody can tell me what's going on here and whether or not something out of line occurred. But I seem to remember Judge Cherry saying that he was going to allow John to testify in narrative fashion and that no one was allowed to ask him questions. But here we are in cross-examination. So Attorney Baker steps up and says, Mr. Gill, are you familiar with the story of David and Goliath? By the way, folks, if it's not already absurd, this is where it gets absurd. John says, yes, sir. Of course he is. He's a minister, over 50 years. Attorney Baker says, do you understand that we are an adversarial court system? And that, John says, I can hardly hear you. Attorney Baker presumably speaks up and says, do you know what an adversarial court system is, sir? Do you understand in court that both sides kind of, for lack of a better term, fight it out? Are you aware of that? That it's one side versus the other in court? Yes, you moron. Everybody is aware of that. That's me ad-libbing. It's not in the transcript. John says, yes. Attorney Baker says, you're aware of that. Okay. Kind of like David versus Goliath, right? I'm not sure if that's what would be considered leading the witness, but seems an awful lot like it. I don't know. Again, I know nothing about the court. John then says, no, this is just about the trial. Attorney Baker pushes forward. One side is facing the other in David versus Goliath. It's like an enormous trial with David. It's enormous, says John. Attorney Baker says, would you say you're David? John then says, and of course he has to see the writing on the wall and he knows where they're going with this at this point. So in an attempt to stymie that, he says, no, it had nothing to do with me being David. It was just that it was an intense trial, and every time I tried, he gets cut off by Attorney Baker. Sir, yes or no? Don't you think it seems odd that you pick an illusion to this where, in the day, the bad person dies? John says it has nothing to do with this prayer. It's just that it was an overwhelming trial, and again, people use the David and Goliath metaphorical language all the time. I was watching the World Series the other night, and people used that term, David versus Goliath, to describe how the Cubs had overcome a 3-1 deficit to the Indians to win the World Series. It was a David versus Goliath, a Herculean effort. Of course, nobody meant that a god and a man had actually mated in order to create a Herculean entity that was somehow propelling the Cubs to victory, because nobody believes this sort of asinine reasoning. Not Attorney Baker, not Tara, not Judge Cherry, not the person transcripting this. Nobody does. But folks, this is a kangaroo court. Attorney Baker then says, sir, can you just answer yes or no questions, please? John then says, can you speak louder because I have a lot of trouble hearing? Attorney Baker says, are you aware of how Facebook works? John says, Facebook? Attorney Baker says, when you post something, you put it out there. People can see it. John says, I put teachings on Facebook since the Lord sent me back from being. Attorney Baker then cuts him off. Yes or no, sir? Do you have a public profile on Facebook? Yeah, I have a profile. So when you post something, you agree with me. Everybody can see it. That's right. And did you think that your wife could see those messages? John says, did I think that my wife would see those posts? did you think that your wife could see those posts? John said, I don't know. She shouldn't be looking at my posts because of the PFA. She shouldn't be. And he's right. Why would she be looking at his page voluntarily in the first place? Attorney Baker says, but you leave the option open that she could have seen them. John then says, but still, it's only cut off once again. Attorney Baker says, sir, yes or no? John says, I guess anybody can look at it. It's public. Attorney Baker says, okay, thank you, sir. And you admit to making these posts? Yes, says John. Attorney Baker, okay, I have nothing further. Judge Cherry then says, anything else, Mr. Gill? John says, yes. Also, on the post, I couldn't have put it on because it was my daughter has a basketball-sized hernia. He's talking about his daughter, Dory, who had an upcoming surgery. He tries to explain what's going on, and Attorney Baker then cuts in and says, relevance, Your Honor. John says, and I wanted a request for her also, but I couldn't put it all on the post. Attorney Baker then says, I'm going to object to the relevance of that. The court says, all right, objection sustained. That's not relevant as to why we're here this morning or this afternoon. John says, yes, sir, and goes quiet. Judge Cherry asks him anything else. John replies no, and Judge Cherry says, you may step down. Mr. Gill, do you have any witnesses to call today? John says no, and Judge Cherry says, closing. Mr. Gill, any closing? Anything you want to state to the court in closing? The defendant, John, says, no, sir. It was simply just a prayer request for me to receive help for what I was going through. Judge Cherry says, all right. And then Attorney Baker says, briefly, Your Honor, this is more than just a simple request. There are references. You know, Mr. Gill references the Bible. Mr. Gill references the Bible. They're references they know. This is something where he could have picked any adversarial thing, any sort of, illusory object or story from the Bible, but he picked something that's very physical, where somebody kills another person. Raise your hands right now while you're listening, even though I can't see you. This is just a mental exercise. Raise your hands if you've ever heard somebody talk about a David and Goliath trial, and you've thought to yourself, gee, I'm worried that person is going to kill someone. Yeah, that's what I thought. Attorney Baker continues, now, not only is Mr. Gill saying that he's going to get killed by the system, but that he is going to defeat his enemy. And you can see how his wife took it. His wife, who is terrified. And the defendant admitted himself she very well could have seen. The PFA is clear. No contact, directly or indirectly. He broadcasted that out. Specific references to the trial where she's the victim, as well as the court dates involving that trial. So it's very clear that he was talking about something. And we'd ask the court to find him in contempt. Thank you. Judge Cherry says, is this a first violation or is this a second violation? Attorney Baker says, this would be the second, Your Honor. John, the defendant, says the first violation is when I went to the Attorney General's office to let him know that my lawyer tricked me into, I'm ad-libbing here, but if you remember back, he went to the Attorney General's office to tell the Attorney General that his lawyer, Stephanie Cooper, had tricked him into signing guilty when he thought he was signing not guilty. If you remember back to the reviews of Stephanie Cooper, this is not unlike her modus operandi. Judge Cherry finishes and says, okay, now this 28th day of June, 2016, following hearing on the petition for indirect criminal contempt, taking of testimony and presentation of the issues before this court, upon consideration of the same, who the hell speaks like this? The court really needs to clean their language up. The court is satisfied that the defendant, John Gill, is in contempt for failing to comply with the final protection from abuse order of September 29th, 2015. It is the order of this court that he pay a fine in the amount of $300, court costs $120 to the Sheriff's Department of Clearfield County, and shall be incarcerated in the Clearfield County Jail for a period of 6 months by the court. Attorney Baker then, of course, as a sniveling ass would, says, thank you, Your Honor. End of proceedings. Now, I hope you are as fired up as I am, because this reads like comedy. This is a skit from Saturday Night Live that you might find if you're channel surfing and laugh at because of its absurdity. This is not what is supposed to occur inside of the court systems in the United States of America. It's an abomination of justice. So, just to make sure you're caught up in where we are in this point in the story, John is now in jail for 6 months, awaiting his jury trial, which is less than 3 weeks away at the time of this hearing. He'll now be forced to prepare for the rest of that trial, or for that trial, while he's incarcerated with no access to any of his documents or any of his legal resources, sleeping on a cot in the hallway, without access to his heart medication, without an attorney, without a public defender. You tell me, what was he supposed to do at this point? The system that was supposed to serve and protect all of its citizens had put him squarely in the crosshairs, chewed him up, and spit him out in an overcrowded jail. Thanks for listening to this episode of Corrupt Clearfield. Remember, you can follow along with all of the documents I'm referencing at corruptclearfield.com. Just scroll down and click the link to the Dropbox file. All the documents are cataloged in order as they appear in each episode. You can also help to support this investigation as it continues, and also our family as we attempt to recover from the damage that has been done. You can donate either by going to corruptclearfield.com and clicking the link as you scroll down the page, or you can go directly to paypal.me/crazygaby. That's my broadcasting alias. Again, that's paypal.me/CRAZ as in zebra, YGAB as in Bravo, EY. Thanks for listening. Until next episode.